Are you setting some people up for failure because you aren't customizing it based on the individual, but rather you're expecting everyone to meet some standard of an interview?
I think you're setting yourself up for failure. When you're trying to narrow in who your shortlist is, you're trying to narrow down variables. So don't put more variables in it by asking questions. Really, it comes down to what is the skill set and the experience you need for them to hit the ground running, and you have to ask the similar questions to them to know what makes someone different than another person.
Welcome to the Backcountry Marketing Podcast. Today I'm sitting down with Tony O'Neill. He is the president over at Highline Outdoor Group. Tony, how are you?
Cole, I'm doing pretty well. How are you doing?
Fantastic. I'm looking forward to this conversation. It's clear that you are also a podcaster. Your setup looks great.
Well, thank you. And I very much have been looking forward to sitting down with you also and having this conversation.
Today, we're going to be talking about hiring. We're going to be talking about recruiting. We're going to be diving into some of your expertise, Tony. The Highline Group is an outdoor recruitment company. You guys place executives kind of all over the industry. And so when we got connected, I feel like I'm always hearing conversations about hiring and trying to find the right people. And it seems like there's a lot of questions and confusion out there, both for the generalist who's trying to get into the industry, but also for the executives that you guys mostly focus on. And so I'm excited to have this conversation and kind of talk about both fields, make this relevant for the generalist and the executive, if you will. But I'd love if you could kind of give the quick story on Highline, what you guys are, what you do, and how you got into this.
Absolutely. So Highline Outdoor Group has been in business now for 12 years, and our core area of expertise is placing high impact leadership in outdoor industry and sporting good companies and brands.
Cool. And when you look at the landscape of the environment today, like the outdoor industry, how healthy would you say the employment is? And I know that's maybe a vague question, but I'm curious how you define that.
Yeah, I don't think that's a vague question. It's not for someone like me. I live in this every single day. And so the reality of where we're at right now from an industry perspective and from an employment perspective is the industry is healthy. It's going to remain healthy. That being said, there's been some challenges this year, and the challenges to anyone who's listening to this, it's probably not a surprise. It really stemmed from the last 3 years of having manufacturing challenges into supply chain challenges, into the demand increased exponentially, and then the inventory then is in the United States. It's available. And so many organizations are sitting on more inventory now than they're comfortable with, or they've ever had, some of them that they've ever had in their history. So because of that, companies and brands have had to sell products in ways that is a little uncomfortable for them. It's not, these aren't ways that they've in the past have ever had to off-price sell. And not only do you have the inventory challenge, you also, some organizations have inventory that is now becoming obsolete, and that's even more painful than having more inventory that you have to discount.
How does that affect the employment status across the industry?
Yeah, so it does, very much so. On a typical year, Highline Outdoor Group, our percentage of positions that are based on attrition, so that is a company has lost an employee and they hire us to go and find and help them with the selection process to replace that employee, has typically sat around 60 to 70% year over year. That's over a 12-year period. This year, my forecast is 90% of the searches that we work on have and will be attrition based. And so that other 10% for this year, or on a normal year, 30 to 40%, those are growth positions. So that means that the brand and the category is doing well, and they see the need to bring in additional talent to capitalize on the opportunity and go into channels that maybe they haven't had historically, a direction that they have gone. So this year is a unique year. 90% of Highline Outdoor Group searches will be replacement based on attrition, and 10% will be based on growth.
Whereas previous years, it's 60 to 70% attrition, 30 to 40% is based on growth?
That's correct.
Interesting. And yeah, tell us a little bit about some of the placements that you do. What are these roles that you're typically helping fulfill?
Yeah, so obviously we work exclusively in the outdoor industry and with sporting goods companies and brands. And with that, it's maybe even easier to, we, Highline Outdoor Group, we work on searches for individuals, anyone who touches product. And so what that means is from product development, R&D, engineering, industrial design, to brand. Brand is a very big part of our business, and that is taking outdoor industry companies that have been historically product marketers, right? That is year over year, here's our product, here's our features, here's our benefits. And they want to adopt really a strategy from the CPG industry, that's the consumer packaged goods industry. And by doing that, they have to shift how they determine what their innovation pipeline is. And that's based on consumer analytics. So instead of having a really smart product development team and a founder and a president that just loves product, all that remains the same. But instead of just totally inventing and try to create a better product, they're going to look at the market, look at the insights, look what the consumers are saying, what they're doing, what they're buying. And so that's the shift. The paradigm shift is then going into building it from a brand perspective, and that's using analytics and consumer insight to drive the innovation pipeline.
Why do you see that? Why do you see that shift happening?
Yeah, that shift typically happens, from my experience, has been when a founder-led company or a president or a company that's they've gotten to a size. And I'm going to use this. It's a little bit not arbitrary. This is actually, these are real numbers. Probably in that $20 to $30 million range, and they've sort of hit a plateau. So they're still making money. They're still growing. Their product line is still increasing. Maybe they're increasing SKUs. Maybe it's a year-over-year product. But what they want to do is they want to break through that plateau. And to break through that plateau, you've got to employ a different strategy of how you develop innovation.
Interesting. And so folks reach out to you, you go and find those key members who can help contribute to the growth, plug them into the company, and away they go, basically.
Yeah, and so that's on the brand and product development side. And, if an organization came to me and said, Highline Outdoor Group, we really need help with a front-end developer, that's not my wheelhouse. There are tech recruiters out there that could wipe the floor with me. That is not my space. Anyone who touches product, which again just kind of goes through product development, brand, operations, sales, marketing, that's the spectrum that we do the best work for.
Gotcha. So let's pause here and let's talk a little bit about general employment in the industry. We can come back to kind of the executive and leadership placements that you do, but let's make this relevant for folks who are listening who aren't in that position. I guess to start with, maybe this is a simple question, but why is the outdoor industry an industry that's highly sought after? Like, I feel like I'm on LinkedIn and on other groups around the internet, I'm constantly seeing so many people talking about trying to find jobs, and maybe they interview for 200 or 300 jobs. And then it's that 301st interview that gets them in the door. Like that takes a lot of persistence. I guess why do people want to be in this industry?
It's very interesting because, and this is something, when I started Highline Outdoor Group, I didn't realize how many people would seek us out trying to find a job in the outdoor industry. For me, my start in this was basically wanting to combine my professional experience of executive search with my personal passion, which is the outdoor industry and really products. I love gear. And what that has created and what I've learned from it over 12 years is individuals, and it doesn't matter what country they're in or what culture they're from, they want to be part of something, part of an organization where they either have connection to the product, but even stronger than connection to the product or the industry is, as humans, we want to do meaningful work. And that is why you see so much information out there of people that are trying so hard to get into this industry to do something that they feel a connection to, but they also feel like, now I'm doing something that has meaningful work. And that meaningful work can be a variety of things in the outdoor industry. It can be helping people get outside. It can be doing conservation work. It can be working with a product that they personally love and they think is something that interests them greatly. So we all have our own personal reasons of why we want, or what meaningful work looks like and what connection to a organization or a business or a service looks like. But there are a lot of people that love the outdoors and can really, they dream about the opportunity of working in an area with passion and love and connection.
So there's this book, and it's pretty familiar, or people have probably heard of it, Start With Why by Simon Sinek. And I think that book speaks to finding your why and the importance of understanding your why. And I would argue that almost everyone who's in the outdoor industry probably does it because they're passionate about it. Is passion enough to get into the industry if there's thousands of people who are equally passionate or maybe more passionate than a candidate is?
No, no, not really. And I'm going to give you an example. And this is hard, right? One of the things that I've instilled in Highline Outdoor Group since day one is everyone who reaches out to us, we're going to reach back. And that doesn't mean that we can give a super personal connection. I can't always get on the phone with people. Majority of times I can't. But the typical person that is, we'll just use an example. We'll say someone who's in the insurance industry. And they're probably some of these people are very talented at what they do. And they want to apply that specific talent into the outdoor industry. But their approach, and at least I can talk to the approach of how they approach Highline Outdoor Group, and that is they will write us a letter or leave us a voicemail, and they'll talk about how passionate they are about cross-country skiing or about kayaking or about hiking. And that's great. But companies, they don't have trouble finding people who are passionate about hiking and kayak and bike and cycling. That is not the challenge that any of these companies have. Their challenge is finding someone who has the specific skill set, who can fit into their culture and has the drive and is going to come into work every day, love what they do, but can accomplish their goals. And that tends to be part of why you see so many people that are out there, they're looking for a job in the outdoor industry, but their approach, they're struggling with how to take their experience and their skill sets and make that marketable into the industry.
Interesting. So are you saying we need to rely less on passion and more on our skill set and present both equally?
If I had a client that says, hey, I just need someone who's a passionate alpine skier, my searches would be a lot easier.
Fair enough. Yeah, you could probably find 20 people without even looking around. So what does that mean? I guess if you had to give kind of blanket advice for folks who are looking to break into the industry, what would you suggest?
Yeah, my first suggestion is you've got to be very certain on what you want to do, but even more importantly than that is what skill, what ability, what experience are you most marketable for? And I really believe in the power of jack of all trades, right? That's someone who they can do operations, they can do marketing, they can do sales. But the reality is when you're trying to get into a highly desired industry that has a significant amount of competition to get into the industry, you've got to lead with what you are truly most marketable in. Not what you did 3 years ago. What are you working on right now that you can take and instantly create value in an organization, in an outdoor company or sporting good company or brand?
So if I'm hearing you correctly, it's focused less on all the things you can do and really try to hone in on the one or two things you're really good at and put that forwards.
Cole, I have this conversation frequently, and I have it up and down the spectrum. So from SVP, C-level to manager level, these individuals, when I do schedule a call with them and I have this conversation, and they want to then tell me about all the things that they did to get to this point in their career. And the reality is that's awesome. And I'm sure that they have a lot of accomplishments and it's worth having a conversation about, but that doesn't mean that that's what makes them marketable. And so my question almost every single call is, tell me what you're working on right now. And when someone explains that to me, I can then understand a little bit more about really where are they most marketable. And it's a very common thing that I might be talking to someone, from a very huge brand, and they want to tell me all this information, and I appreciate it, I value it, but it's not going to help me help them.
There's this kind of the same discussion that happens frequently in the agency world, which is, do you be a generalist or do you be a specialist? And there's heated opinions on both sides of this. And our approach has always been, you want to be the specialist. You want to be the person that someone goes to hire because they need a very specific skill set. And so for us, we tell stories in the outdoor world. We aren't the company that's going to go and, make a video about a lawn mowing company. I'm sure there's some great lawn mowing companies out there, but that's just not what we do. So it's interesting to hear you say that finding the right people for the job almost takes the same approach as an agency might position themselves.
Yeah, that's a good analogy, Cole. I think that, when a company is in their early stage, and take for an example, Jetboil, right? When Jetboil was early and Steve Perry had founded the company, or I think he founded it with a couple other individuals. When you're early stage, a generalist is really valuable, right? Because you got, okay, this person, founders go through a lot of pain, right? We wear a lot of hats. And finding someone who can then put on a few of those hats is very, very valuable. But once a company starts their growth trajectory, right? They're in this line and their sales are increasing, their brand awareness is increasing. That's when they truly need a specialist. And that goes all the way until, an organization that may be public, then they even get more refined, right? They have more positions, which means they can specialize and go deeper into each one of those functional areas.
I've heard it said, let's say you owned a Porsche. Do you own a Porsche by chance?
No, but I'd like to someday.
Okay, fair enough. If you owned a Porsche, would you take the Porsche to the jack of all trades mechanic, or would you take it to the Porsche dealership, which knows exactly which model, what type of engine they're working with? If you're invested in cars, chances are you're going to take it to the specialist.
100% agreed. I would absolutely take my Porsche to a specialist Porsche mechanic.
It's the same thing applies to jobs to some degree.
When you hit that point, when the company's when the company is growing and they get past that not founder-led, but they get past that point, and maybe it's after 10 employees, 8 employees, then they're going to start looking very specifically for specific skill sets of areas that they have deficiencies in.
So I've heard this in the tech industry. The kids who are coming out of school today are learning skills that will be used in the future. Something to that effect. For people who are trying to break into the industry, should they be focusing on skills that maybe aren't relevant today, but will be relevant in 5 years from now? How will the industry evolve? What skill sets will be relevant? Which skill sets won't be relevant? And how can we try to position ourselves effectively based on the industry's evolvement?
Well, things are changing pretty fast right now. I think we may be sitting in the most amazing time in history to be alive from a technology standpoint, from what we can accomplish, what we can learn, what we can do. Someone coming out of school right now, they really don't have any skill sets, right? Unless you're an accountant or you're writing code, right? Those are skills that you do learn while you're in college. But once you get out is really where you develop the skill sets. So knowing, take someone who's in R&D, and right now, a very, very common product that's being used across the board is carbon fiber. But what's next, right? What's after carbon fiber? And there's different directions you can go after carbon fiber. Like one, carbon fiber isn't very recyclable. It's a very difficult product to recycle, to pull that resin out of all those small fibers. But there's a new product, and it's called thermoplastic. It's light, it's strong, maybe even lighter than carbon fiber, but it's a little bit more expensive. But not many companies are using it yet. It hasn't been adopted yet by the bicycle industry, which anyone who's listening from the bike business, I hope that you'll take a very strong look at this, because this material can be recycled. So to your question about someone who's looking 5 years ahead, it's a difficult thing because things are changing very fast. From a product development standpoint, from a hard goods and soft goods, I think you can look forward and I'm sure someone at Arc'teryx or Patagonia with the laser welds saw that years before it was actually being implemented on products that we use every single day now.
Yeah. From the marketing department side, are there certain jobs you're seeing more of pop up these days, or less jobs that are popping up than maybe they used to be?
Yeah, that's something very interesting that's happening right now. And it's not super new. I'd say that over the past 2 years, right, content creation has become extremely valuable to an organization, right? I think a lot of that has to do, and I'm not an expert on pay-per-click and Google ads, don't use them, never have. But creating your brand by creating quality content is critical to making it a connection to your consumer. And so content creation has been growing. We've worked on more searches for heads of they're creative directors, but they're really creative directors of content because that's what they want in their background. DTC and direct to consumer, that grew pretty fast for the past several years. Now organizations are going a little bit even deeper with that, and now they're looking specifically for leaders that specialize in selling to Amazon, right? So not only do we have someone who goes direct to consumer that historically may have been over the Amazon channel, their own direct to consumer, but now they're looking for people that can specifically create marketing, create relationships, build the SEO for Amazon specifically. And what's after Amazon? I'm sure there's a lot after Amazon, and that's that's what they're looking for, is people that can now take them in deeper into the omni-channel.
Do you have any guesses as to what a common job description will be in 5 years from now in a marketing department? If you're seeing a lot of creative directors being hired these days, like what could be the next thing?
From a creative standpoint, I think it goes back to the content creation, right? So it's not going to be a creative director; it's going to be a director of content. It is a director of content. They already do exist. But from a pure marketing perspective, I almost think you might know this better than I do. I can't say that in 5 years, here is specifically how we're going to market, but I think what it's going to come back to, I think it might come full circle, and that is, how do we bring the human back into the connection with our customers? Because AI is going to be, right? It's going to be on a rip right now. We're actually seeing, my guess is we're probably seeing the biggest jump right now. And I'm saying that because as I was listening to Sam Altman, who was on the Joe Rogan podcast a week ago, and he had a really good analogy. And I think this applies to your question in marketing. And he said, now that ChatGPT and AI has been released, it's been out for a year now, at least ChatGPT has, AI has been out much longer than that. He said, when you look at an iPhone, and the iPhone 14 to the 15, you don't see that big of a change. There are changes, but they're not that big. Even if you look at the iPhone 10 to the iPhone 15, it's not that big. But if you look at the first iPhone to iPhone 10 or iPhone 15, that's a huge jump. And so right now with ChatGPT and these AI apps, right? Photography is going to get more streamlined. Editing is getting more streamlined. Content or graphic design is getting more streamlined. And so we're going to go through this period right now. It's going to be, we're seeing it, right? It's kind of like a rocket ship. But then we're going to hit a point where we're going to have small incremental advances. And so I think that being able to use these AI tools and still take the traditional tools, take like Photoshop, but also use that in combination with an AI app, I think that's going to be something that is going to be sought after. But I think it's going to be a condensed short period of time, because we've seen now the biggest jump in ChatGPT type AI interfaces that we're all using.
So I feel like since you brought up AI and we're talking about employment, I have to ask this question then. People ask a lot of questions. Well, will I have a job? What's the water cooler talk around that idea?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, here's my advice. If you're not using it yet and you haven't learned how to use ChatGPT, you're behind the curve, and get on it right now. I'm guessing most of your listeners are more sophisticated than that. But is it going to take jobs? I don't think so, right? Someone's got to run it, right? They're going to need people who know how to prompt it, right? How do you write? There's positions right now and they're called prompt engineers, right? How do you write the right series of prompts to get the right output? And so that's very applicable to marketing, but that's also very applicable to product development. And as this thing gets smarter and it connects deeper into whether it's real-time information from the web or from the amount of content that we're all putting in there, right? It's learning from us. And that's the interesting part that I don't know a lot about, but is something that I wonder with all my prompts and when I use it, is it then taking my information? We'll eventually start sharing that with other people. And I don't know yet.
Well, I've heard that any prompt you give ChatGPT, it owns that prompt and it owns the response. So I've heard from another colleague, like if you are giving it something confidential or that you don't want it to have legal rights to, you probably shouldn't enter it in the first place.
I am sure of that. I have talked to a few people who also they're recruiters and they do executive search, and as recruiters typically, technology is a big part of our business because there's so many facets, right? It's kind of like content creation. There's so many steps. Well, doing a search, there's a significant amount of steps. And so we're always looking for ways, what are steps that can be sort of outsourced, not necessarily to a human, but a back-end applicant tracking system or our own technologies. And when people start putting in resumes into ChatGPT, that actually concerns me, because there's a lot of private information. And so our practice is we put no personal information into ChatGPT because we don't know yet what the ramification is in the future of where that information, where it goes, what happens to it. And as we all know, right, I mean, Our information is sold on a market constantly, and that's nothing new, right? Every time we probably pop on our phone into an app, it's just more information being sold. But that's something that it has to be considered.
Yeah. Let's switch gears a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about culture and finding the right fit for a team. This is something I think about a lot, and I feel like you're in a unique position to potentially speak to this. Again, using a marketing department as an example, this is true for every department, but having the right people is key. But what's maybe more important than the right people is having the right culture and making sure that those people all fit into that culture. If you're bringing someone outside an organization and placing them into an organization, what steps can you take to help ensure a good culture fit?
Yeah. So culture fit is super critical in the outdoor industry, brands and sporting good companies, because they've already got a culture inside. And culture, honestly, it's driven top down. That's ultimately how culture is built within an organization. And there's a difference between cultural fit and cultural add. And anyone who's listening, I would ask you to think about people who bring a different perspective, because that different perspective into your organization really can add to the culture. So look in the past and or not in the past, just look at we'll just say one of the big cycling companies. Insanely good bikes, very, very sharp marketing. They want to hire people that are lightweight, ride fast, ride at the front of the pack. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if everyone in that organization fits that mold to the T, where did the new ideas come from? So cultural fit, super important, right? You've got to want to be around this person, or be willing to be around this person that you hire every single day, and they got to be willing to be around you also. But even more importantly is, can they bring more culture into your organization that maybe helps the organization see new ways, or challenges the team in ways they haven't been challenged before? And ultimately, what does that create? It creates innovation.
How do you find that though? Like, do you just get a sense for culture fit versus add in conversation? Are there specific attributes that you're looking for when you're going through resumes or data on folks? How do you feel that out?
Yeah, so you won't get any of that information from a resume. I do think that people that have public profiles that are in marketing or brand, their profiles better be a 10 out of 10. And I think that's your first step of, is this person serious? And then from there, when you're engaging with them, the human to human contact, right, you're going to get a sense. And there's different ways you can get a sense of someone, if they could be a cultural fit, if they truly do connect to the product, connect to the organization. And there's very specific questions that you can ask. And one of the questions that I think is really, that helps bring that out very quickly to the surface is, if you're going to be interviewing someone, it doesn't matter. It's on the telephone, if it's a Zoom, or it's in person. And you ask them what they did over the weekend. And so if it's Monday or Tuesday, ask them what they did last weekend. But if it's Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday, ask them what their plans are for this weekend. Or if they, even better, so you don't sound like you're prying so deeply on what your plans are, ask them if they have anything fun planned. And once they start talking about what's going on in their life, I'm not going to say that's going to give you the exact cultural fit right there, but you're really going to be on the start to understanding that person outside of work. And that is where we understand more about us as humans and about what drives us, what's going on in our lives. And that will lead you down a path. So that question is, did you do anything fun last weekend? Or do you have anything fun planned for this weekend?
I like that. That's such a simple question. It's something that I feel like we incorporate daily into our conversations with folks. But yeah, you can take that to a whole new level. When you're finding folks, how much of it is, let's say, skill-based? How much of it is culture fit? If you had to boil down a person to those two buckets, what's more important? Are they 50-50?
No. I think being able to do the job, which is essentially skill fit, it weighs more than cultural fit. Just because someone fits in the culture doesn't mean they can do the job. And so, on a search for Highline Outdoor Group, we're going to look for people that fit, what we call a success profile. Here is the profile of what the person who can hit the ground running in the job. And then after we have the basics, right? We have the information, we reach out to them, and then we take them through a skills assessment. Well, while that's happening, the cultural components of who they are and what drives them and what motivates them, all that begins to surface. And part of that is because we use a very structured process. And to anyone who is listening to this right now, your interviews need to be structured with variables. And what I mean by that is you should be asking each individual nearly the identical questions. And then the variables are finding out, what are they passionate about? Why are they interested in the opportunity? But most importantly is the only way that you can compare one candidate to another candidate is you've got to take them through the same process.
Interesting. See, I would almost think about this. If you did a standard interview process, then are you setting some people up for failure because you aren't customizing it based on the individual, but rather you're expecting everyone to meet some standard of an interview?
I think you're setting yourself up for failure because you can't benchmark candidate A versus candidate B unless they're taken through a similar process, right? If you meet candidate A and you go on a group ride with candidate A, okay, we'll call that interview one type. And then the second type, say you take this other candidate, you paddle out and you go surfing with them. It's a totally different dynamic, environment, experience. But if you sit down and you meet a candidate A at a coffee shop that you enjoy going to, that's a nice place to have good conversation, and you then bring candidate B to that coffee shop, you're limiting, because hiring comes down to, when you're trying to narrow in who your shortlist is, you're trying to narrow down variables. So don't put more variables in it by asking questions that are different for this person because they're a man and this person's a woman, and you ask the questions differently. Really, it comes down to is, what is the skill set and the experience you need for them to hit the ground running, and you have to ask the similar questions to them to know what makes someone different than another person.
If you had to take a wild guess, how many companies in the industry have what you would define as a quality interview process versus a poor interview process?
Yeah, there's definitely companies in our industry that have really great interview processes, but they're typically the bigger ones. They have people that specialize in training their hiring managers. They have questions that they've already created for their hiring managers. And that's the Nikes, the Under Armours, the Adidas, the Columbias, the REIs of the world. These companies have a structured process. It's the smaller companies that, they may have an HR leader who also does payroll, who also manages the office get-togethers. They're wearing so many hats. HR historically just wears tons of hats. But that organization is not going to be sophisticated enough yet to have those processes in place.
And if you had to define what the purpose of the interview process is for, how would you describe it?
Well, the purpose of the interview process is to evaluate one individual against a pool of other individuals that are on your short list. There's different components, right? And I'll give you an example of how we do our interview processes. We call it the candidate scorecard. And the candidate scorecard for us is really three things. And you have motivations, and we're going to call them motivations: personal motivation, professional motivation, and financial motivation. And if you go deep into each one of those three motivations, then you truly know if you have a candidate or not.
Why is that?
Well, you've got personal motivation. So you've got to figure out, one, what drives this person as a human, right? Are they driven to grow? Are they driven to learn more? Are they driven to lead a team? Are they trying to have progression in their career? Then you've got, we'll call it the professional motivation. The personal motivation is, is vacationing really important to this person? Is climbing all the 14-foot peaks, is that a motivation? Do they want to live in Asia for a month out of the year, every year? What is that personal motivation? And then you have the financial motivations, right? Is this person going to fit within what compensation you have allocated for the role? Is it going to make them feel like they've had the progression? Does it make their living circumstances better than what they had before? And so those three motivations are absolutely critical. But when you know what motivates that individual from their personal, their professional, and their financial motivations, that's when you know if you have a true viable candidate.
Is there anything that's considered if all three of those work together? Should they work together to some degree, or is there an indicator if someone isn't a good fit because two of the three, overlap to some degree?
Yeah, they're never going to be all 10 out of 10, right? They're going to be at different variables, but being certain on what you need out of the individual and the profile of the individual from the very start, before you ever start the search, before, it's while you're putting together what that profile or job description looks like, that is specifically when you can highlight, here's what we need, these three motivations, we need them to be above this bar. And no one's perfect. There is no perfect candidate. It is who has the right combinations of these skills, motivations, cultural fit that is going to come in, hit the ground running, and what we all hope is thrive in your organization.
So this is interesting, kind of a tangent, but I think it connects. So earlier this weekend, I was on a hunting trip, and I was on a long drive back, and I was listening to a Jocko Willink podcast, if you've heard of him.
Yeah, of course.
I'm a big fan of his. And he was talking to another Navy SEAL, and they were talking about, are there indicators that can suggest that a candidate who's entering BUDS, the program to become a SEAL, are there things that you can look at that will help predict whether or not this person will be successful? And there really wasn't much that they could go off of that could discern whether or not someone will make it. But the one thing that they did find was that if you interviewed the person, their team, their peers, and their family, if you asked them to describe this individual, and if all three of those descriptions lined up, if the person described themselves in a similar way that their peers and their family did, it meant that basically they were aligned with themselves. They understood who they were. And those people, more often than not, would make it through training and become a SEAL. Folks who maybe their peers evaluated them differently than they evaluated themselves, for whatever reason, those people would have a lower chance of succeeding. And I'm wondering if there's something to be said about your three motivations compared to kind of these three evaluations that the SEAL teams use.
Well, it kind of fits in there, right? And I'm curious, because I did not listen to this specific episode with Jocko. Do they interview the family before they accept someone into BUDS?
I don't know. And they didn't talk about that, but I would be interested to know if they do.
I would too. And when you look at the military specifically, I mean, is there a greater recruiting organization on the planet? Like, they're recruiting people to do things, very, very challenging, and nothing is easy in the military. But on top of that, they have so much data, right? And that's, an organization that has 30 employees or 200 employees, you really don't have that much data, right? You can't validate something against a huge pool of people like the military can. They can, I don't know how many people they recruit a year, but it's definitely in the tens, if not 50,000 people a year. They have so much data, and they are such a recruiting powerhouse that they really should know exactly what is the makeup. Is when this person's coming in, they should be able to predict the path that person's going to end up on. But someone going into BUDS, I don't know. That's such an interesting thing if the family is part of that evaluation process of who they're going to bring into the program.
Another factor that they mentioned also, they were evaluating each SEAL candidate's why. And this kind of goes back to my earlier question, which is how important is your passion? And they discovered their passion matters, their why matters, but their stronger why doesn't necessarily mean that someone with a less why will become a SEAL versus someone who has a really strong why. You don't have to have this very articulate, romantic, this is why I'm doing this in order to be successful, which kind of feels like it goes against everything that I've assumed about doing hard things. It makes me think about the variables that are at play there.
Yeah, I mean, Simon Sinek, the why is such an important question for all of us, right? It's a question of why we build our business. What are we doing on a day-to-day basis? Are we with the right people, the right group, the right team? But then it makes me think about someone like David Goggins, right? David Goggins had the why, right? I've never seen anyone that has more of the why than David Goggins. And, he goes in, and not only does he go on into, through SEAL training, and then he becomes a ranger, like he does all these other things. But when you look at that individual, that human, the why was there from the very beginning. And maybe I would have known that had I not read his book, but it's very apparent in that book where the why came from.
So as you're looking for executives, what does this make you think about? Are you focused very much on the day-to-day of finding executives, or do you think about kind of these bigger picture questions that influence how you find folks?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's both, right? You've got the day-to-day, and that is managing a process specifically that is going to give your client, my client, the outcome that they hired me to do. Simultaneously, I am constantly sitting in a world of Kaizen, right? Kaizen is the Japanese theory of constant improvement, right? Each time you do something, it's constant improvement, right? Or podcasting, right? I'm sure you're trying each podcast, you want it to be better. And for me, each search, I want it to be a better experience for my customer, for the candidates that I interact with. I want them to leave and I want them to leave and have an experience that was a good experience. So that bigger part of the question, to be honest, doesn't really leave my mind very often. I feel like I live in that world of how can I make this better for everyone who's involved? And some of that's my characteristic, right? It's, I really believe that, kindness and thoughtfulness are really important qualities in individuals. And that's something to me that I want to constantly improve in my life. And so that bigger picture of how to take it into my business, right? Because my world exists like this. Family's number one, business is number two, and then there's the rest of life. And business is pretty close to family too, right? I want to give the best experience I possibly can. And so thinking about recruiting executives, there are so many variables. There are so many components to a single search and to each individual. We're all different, right? We're extremely different, right? On the surface, yes, we got some core tenets that make us similar. But when you really get into the psychology of an individual who is going to make a career change, that's going to leave one company to go to another company, there's a lot of nuance in that. And that is where this business becomes extremely serious. And that seriousness is trying to make sure that this is right for everybody involved.
So here's a scenario that I hear happen all too often. A company goes out to find an executive, they bring someone in, and for whatever reason, it's a terrible fit. And the team starts to disintegrate, starts to implode. How do you avoid that? We talk kind of generally about finding folks, but now I want to talk a little bit more about finding executives, which is really what you do. How do you prevent a scenario like that from happening?
Nobody can prevent it. All that we can do is the best job of evaluation decision-making that we can. Now, that being said, running a process where you have access to the right individuals and you can compare them side by side, all these things give you one more point in the advantage bucket, right? Here's another point. This is why this person lives closer. This person, his family is actually on this side of the country. You have these different components that make it. But there's so many more variables than that. And I think one of the biggest variables, and this is a hard one because I don't have control over this. I coach on it and I consult on it constantly with my clients, is the onboarding process. You are setting someone up for success based on building out an onboarding process that stays engaged with the individual, the people they're going to interface with on a day-to-day basis. This isn't, welcome to the team, we're going to take you out to lunch today, you're going to go to lunch with this person on Friday, and we're going to then ramp you up and give you all the tools and things that you need. It's constant engagement. And so where I find success, one of the greatest areas of success that a company has to bring on an executive who is going to succeed and stay with the company and want to come to work every day, is how they start with that individual. And yes, the hiring process is a big part of that, right? It's, you're being, just as you're evaluating that executive, they're evaluating you. And then once you bring them on, that's when the real heavy lifting starts. And that is keeping them engaged, making sure that they're being listened to and they have the tools, and they have the connections within the organization, right? And it's sometimes you feel like when you bring a really high powered, whether it's a director or a manager or a director or a vice president or a C-level individual, that they can hit the ground running. And yeah, there are parts they can hit the ground running, but integrating into the team, the organization, the vendors, the outside agencies, all that is what ultimately, essentially lifts that person up and creates them a stronger connection to the organization. So when they've been with your organization for, say, 6 months, and someone like me calls them, because I will call people. I love to call people who have only been in an organization for a few months, because if their onboarding wasn't good, they're starting to question their decision. And that is a time where they're going to be more open to having a conversation. And just like an organization wants to make a quick decision, all right, this person's not working out and we've tried everything, or that individual is this isn't working out. I'm going to cut bait soon also.
Could you describe any amazing onboarding experiences that you've witnessed happen? If you could just describe kind of generally, like if you could create an amazing onboarding experience for someone, what would be some key pieces of that?
Yeah, it's completely dependent on what the role in the organization, the role. And so I'm going to answer this question, but there's the biggest variable that we see nowadays is individuals who are remote. And remote onboarding, you really have no advantage. Like, yeah, you have the advantage that you can cast a wider net for the talent, and you think you can land someone even more talented because they don't have to uproot their family and their whole life and move somewhere else. And that does give you access to more talent. But onboarding that person who is remote, that is a very challenging situation. And the organization and the structure and the plan has to be nearly impeccable for the organization who hires the person. Okay, so now back to the person who is in the organization, who comes to the office, we'll say 3 days to 5 days a week. Now, if I could design that, it would be based on what the person's role is, which functional areas of the organization do they interface with, and what I think trumps everything is human connection. And that's whether you have a standing meeting for the first 8 weeks with a department head or a team or a small team that you're going to interface with. Maybe it's not even your direct team. And then you have the leader of the organization, the CEO or the president or the general manager or the brand director. That person needs to stay very, very engaged with their new hire, because that ultimately is what's going to motivate them. They're going to build a stronger connection with them. And so how do you do that? It's actually, from that general manager or CEO perspective, it's asking questions beyond just the business, right? What do you see the deficiency is here? Where can we improve on this? What do you think of what we've done with this department? How are things going with the transition for you and your family now that you have relocated to this city? There are literally hundreds of questions you can ask, but it's a combination of the business focused professional questions. But there's also personal questions, right? Changing jobs is a life-changing event. And it's not just life-changing for that person. It's life-changing for their spouse. It's life-changing for their children. It's life-changing for their family that was in the city they were living in prior. And so just asking those questions and making that human connection is absolutely critical to integrate someone into an environment where they want to come to work every day.
I mean, it's taking care of the whole person, making sure that the individual is feeling welcome, is feeling up to speed, is feeling equipped. That really sets the onboarding process and the hiring process apart.
And it's easy, Cole, it's easy to fall in the trap when you bring on a high performer and they're just automatically coming in, they're coming in and they're literally making great change, and there's tons of low-hanging fruit, and they're making things better, to almost take that for granted. And that's probably where you need that human connection more than ever, because once that low-hanging fruit has been gathered and harvested, right, now the hard stuff happens. And then you go from a very enthusiastic person that's making great change and making progress and creating growth, and then now they've made that growth, and you've got to get them into the next level at that 8 months or 12 months, or your product development in the 18th month. That is when that personal connection is going to trump that professional satisfaction as well. I don't want to say trump. It's just an important part of staying connected with that individual, because attrition is expensive and hiring is hard. Hiring is painful. It's emotionally draining. It's like going to a casino with the most important, resource you have and hoping that you have made the right call and the right selection.
Do most people make the right call? Do they make the right bet?
I think when an organization runs a process that is using their network, if they have to go external and hire someone like myself, and they follow a process and they listen to their trusted advisors, I think they are set up for success. I find that most hiring, when a hire becomes not the right person, it's not the person, it's the organization and how that they brought that person in and how they onboarded them and how they're looking to build that person up versus just expecting that person to just immediately become a pillar in an organization that they're brand new in.
How much time would you expect a new hire to come in and become a pillar? Like, is that a year?
It just depends on the role, right? It depends if you're product development, right? That product development cycle in our industry takes time. Product development in most industries takes time. If this person is going to come in as a CFO and their role is to get the budget figured out, get month to month, get their systems in place, make sure that their controller and their accountants and everyone is humming, right? That you can essentially, I don't want to put a timeline on it because I'm not a CFO, but you get to a point where you've got that machine humming. And so maybe that's a position where in a year that they become the pillar. A brand executive, think about all the different parts that person's involved with, right? They're on consumer analytics, marketing, product development, engineering, sales. Like, there are so many pieces in that. So it takes time.
Yeah. For an executive that's looking for a change, any words of advice, any consideration that they should give?
Get really clear on the fundamentals. Are you open to relocation? What's the right size of the company? What industry are you going to target? And put that on paper, right? Write out what your goals are. But realize that you're probably, just like there's no perfect candidate, there's no perfect opportunity, right? There's really great opportunities, but there's no such thing as perfection. So going into it, that mindset that it may not look exactly how you want it, but if all these other pieces add up right, you're on the right path.
Hiring is notoriously difficult. It's painful and it's frustrating. Why is that?
Hiring is very difficult and it's extremely painful. It's painful financially. It's painful emotionally. It drains your time, your energy. You spend all this time trying to talk to these individuals, have them sell themselves. You sell the organization. You sell the vision. You sell the teams and the support that's already in place. And while you're doing that, really talented individuals are likely talking to other organizations or people like me, right? So they have more opportunities. And so when you think that you've got that right person, and if it doesn't work out, that is a very painful experience to go through. So part of minimizing the pain, Cole, is getting really super clear on two parts. One is structuring your process. The interview process is going to look like X, Y, Z. They're going to talk to this person, and this person, and not deviating from your plan. Set your plan and follow your plan unless you have to change it. But the second part of it is being extremely clear on the profile of the individual. What are the must-haves and what are the nice-to-haves? And put as much as you can in that nice-to-haves and be very finite in your must-haves, and you can be more broad in your nice-to-haves. And the component that's most interesting that happens frequently on searches for us with our customers is once we start the search and we're surfacing individuals and they start having conversations, that's when the position and the profile becomes more clear. They may actually realize after talking to a few different individuals that maybe something that they were really, really hyper-focused on as a must-have isn't really a must-have, it's a nice-to-have. Or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe there was a nice-to-have that they've realized this person has to have that. And so be open to that and being able to shift and adjust as needed, and that you're going to meet some people that may not fit your mold perfectly, but that doesn't mean that you should always try to hire someone, the square person in the square hole. If you got a trapezoid and you're trying to hire for a triangle, you can take those corners and push them out just a little bit, and you may have an even better person to help you drive a certain part of your business.
I love that. Must-haves and nice-to-haves. Sounds simple, but in execution, it's very different. Not so simple. How many people have you helped place?
Oh, gosh. In 12 years, I don't have an exact number. Hundreds. I can't tell you the exact number. I've got all the other KPIs and metrics, but I've never looked at it as a number. Like I look at podcasts as kind of like episode number, but I've never looked at people like that.
If you had to wrap it up for us, Tony, and I'm going to give you two scenarios. I want you to kind of distill all of your wisdom from these hundreds of placements that you've helped place. For the executive who's looking for a placement in a marketing organization, perhaps a CMO, any final words for them? And someone who is trying to break into a marketing department, and let's say they're looking for that marketing manager role, and they're just kind of entry level and they're trying to figure it out. What would you suggest to them?
Okay. So the first question was, is this from the hiring perspective or from the person looking for the job perspective?
The person looking for the job.
Okay. So from a CMO perspective, so this is your question is if someone's going to enter the market and they are a CMO level individual. Okay. Very simple on the surface is that CMO has to get very clear on what they're looking for. And when I say clear, you've got to get down into the serious details. And CMOs, there's really three types of CMOs. But the two main types of CMOs that we see is you've got marketing communication CMOs, right? So that's someone who's really good at creating marketing and running a team and a creative team. And then you've got a CMO on the other side, and they don't just oversee the creative and the marketing teams. They own the P&L. And that is the biggest differentiator between two types of CMOs in our industry. And so for them, getting clear on specifically the type of role, is the organization set up where they can own the P&L, or if they don't need to own the P&L, and that would be the biggest differentiator, I would say, in a CMO role amongst the brand, the category, the location, the size of the business, size of the team, and so forth.
Fascinating. And for the entry-level position?
So this is for, we'll say, a marketing manager, someone who is going to go in, we'll say 5 years experience, 5, 7, 8 years experience. They need to look really sharp on how they present themselves, their profiles, their socials, and they also need to be very clear. Do they want to work in an organization that is siloed? Do they want to work in an organization where it's a very collaborative effort? Do they want to work with is it a founder-led company, or do they want to work with a bigger company that has more structure in place? What kind of resources that they're going to need? Get really clear on those components before you start going into the market and picking off, this opportunity, this opportunity, this opportunity. But for both of them, the most important aspect of all of their search is, once they get clear, is to leverage their network. And you leverage your network through a multitude of ways, right? You've got LinkedIn, but what's even more powerful than LinkedIn? It's what's sitting in our pocket right now, and that's your telephone. And your telephone is sitting on a significant amount of contacts. And what I would recommend anyone who's listening today, and this is going to push you a little bit out of your comfort zone, and those people and those individuals that you have met over the years and you haven't spoken to in a few years, and maybe you don't even remember how you left it with that person, past companies, reach out to them first and tell them that you're looking. And what you're going to find, and what I'm seeing now more than I've ever seen in my 20 years of doing search, is people are more receptive right now to reconnecting with people and to helping individuals. And by using what's in your pocket and those contacts that are sitting on your telephone, or those emails that are sitting in your Gmail right now, when you have someone that you don't know if it makes sense to reach out to them, or you don't know how you left it with them, and you don't know if they want to hear from you, do it. Push yourself and reach out to them. Tell them what you're looking for, and start with your network.
Amazing. Tony, is there anything that we haven't discussed that you want to end us on?
I feel like we've covered a lot, Cole. And if I was going to wrap it up from my side, from my perspective of someone who works in the hiring side of this business, this industry, every single day, and that is, remember, everyone that you speak with is having challenges in their life and has gone through challenges, right? Life isn't very easy. We've all, I actually think life's pretty hard. And if you think about each person that you interact with and how you can be kind and how you can interact with them professionally and you can follow up with them, it goes a long way in not only your own perception, but your brand's perception. And we're all just humans, right? We all want the connection. We all want to feel wanted. And most of us, the super majority of us, have no ill intentions. All we want is good for the people that we're around. And remember that, because we're all just human. And that human connection is how the best hiring gets done, is by really connecting as a human and at the professional level.
Amazing. Well, Tony, you've given us a lot to think about, a lot to mull over, and I appreciate you kind of breaking down this conversation from multiple sides and making this relevant for a variety of listeners. If folks want to connect with you, if they want to learn more about Tony, if they want to learn more about Highline Outdoor Group, where can they go to find you?
Yeah, very simple. You can find me on LinkedIn. I am not a hard person to find by design. And you can connect with me there. And then my website, if you want to get a little bit more of a taste of Highline Outdoor Group, highlineoutdoor.com. Should give you a lot of information that will help you understand a little bit more about us.
And Tony, you just launched a podcast all about hiring and, well, basically things that we talked about. So if folks want to go deep, well, why don't you give the plug? It's your podcast.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. So it's not about hiring. I mean, hiring can be a component of it. But
apparently I need to do my homework better.
Here's what it is. It is, I feel very fortunate that over the past 12 years in the outdoor and sporting goods industry specifically, I have had exposure to really amazing individuals at all levels. And with that, I wanted to create a forum, a podcast that can help inspire and educate people. And that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if they're in the industry or they're from outside the industry. What I want to highlight and what I'm highlighting is individual journeys and struggles and challenges and how they were overcome in an executive's career progression. So the name of the podcast is Outdoor Industry Executive Voices. And it's a video podcast, but it's available on all the audio directories. So that is Spotify, Amazon, Apple. The video portion of it is also, you can watch it on YouTube and also on Spotify. And if you do view it on YouTube, I'd really appreciate if you subscribe, because that will help the algorithm get us exposure in front of more people that hopefully we can inspire and educate more about our industry and the career journeys and paths of really industry titans from the outdoor and sporting goods industry.
Awesome. Sounds good. Well, Tony, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your thoughts. Here's something I'm going to try to end on. What's one question that you're asking yourself right now that is something that's a question that's bouncing around in your head that you don't have an answer to, but you would really like to solve? This is a new way I'm considering ending each episode.
That's a really great question. So right now, what's going through my mind? What if I could solve something right now, Cole? That would be removing the ambiguity of hiring and remove the ambiguity of someone who is on their own job search, so people don't feel left in the dark. So employers don't feel like, why did this person not want the job? Why did they not communicate back with us? We thought we had a really great connection. And the same goes for people who are looking for jobs right now, is when they take action and they express interest to be considered for an opportunity, that they don't feel like they're being left out in the dark. That's what I'd like to solve.
Amazing. With that, Tony, we'll leave it. I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Cole, thank you so much for having me. It was really good.
It was. Take care.
You too.
Bye.